Welcome. Today I found an article in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. This is from the January 2025. It's volume 121, issue 1. So I will put a link in the description so that you can look at the study as well. The article is titled Adulthood Dietary and Lifestyle Patterns and the Risk of Breast Cancer, Global Cancer Update Program Systematic Literature Review. So I chose this article because 4 years ago, a spot was identified on my left breast that I'll explain at the end of how I got it to go away. So spoiler alert. The article compares different types of plant-based diets to what they call Western meat alcohol diet. It's a standard American diet, so that's what I'm going to call it. There is no comparison to an animal-based ketogenic diet. So, sorry, I was hoping for that, but it didn't happen. This study, quote, aimed to review the evidence on dietary and lifestyle patterns and the risk of breast cancer. So they looked at 84 publications in this article. And so the study concluded, quote, to adopt combined aspects of a healthy diet and lifestyle according to WCRF, AICR, and ACS, we'll go over those scores, encouraging a healthy weight, makes sense. Physical activity, makes sense. Alcohol and smoking avoidance, also makes sense. And a healthy diet. This is the part that I disagree with. So it says to not have or discourages you from having red and processed meat and encourages you to have fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and cereals. I'm sorry, cereals shouldn't be on anybody's list. So to expand on the acronyms, WCRF is the World Cancer Research Fund, the AICR is the American Institute for Cancer Research, and the ACS is the American Cancer Society. I find it interesting that in the intro of the article, it also stated, quote, the 2018 third expert report concluded that evidence of the relationship of dietary patterns and the risk of breast cancer is inconclusive. Again, they didn't look at an animal-based ketogenic diet. When you look at the scoring system, it's entirely skewed, in my opinion, based on what I can only imagine is false, outdated information. So, for example, if you consume less than or equal to 500 grams or 18 ounces of red meat and less than 21 ounces of processed meat in a week, you get a score of 1, which is the whole score. But if you consume greater than 500 grams of red meat or greater than 100 grams or 3 ounces of processed meat in a week, you get a score of 0. On the flip side, if you consume greater than or equal to 400 grams of fruit and veggies, you get a score of 0.5. If you consume less than 200 grams of fruits and veggies, you get a score of nada. Again, this study does not cover ketogenic nutrition. Of the 84 publications that they looked at, 77 were observational studies, which I don't take much stock in. And the article did identify that they are susceptible to several biases. So that was actually good that they put that in there. Because really, who can remember what they've eaten over the last year? I mean, I can, because I love what I'm eating. I keep it simple. But the vast majority of people don't even know what they ate the last week. So that's why I don't hold a lot of stock in observational studies, but we'll set that aside. So 7 publications from 3 randomized controlled trials were also included, which I do give more credit to randomized controlled trials or RCTs, but I have learned that they do have shortfalls, or they can have shortfalls as well. So you have to be particular with those. You can't just look at it and go, oh yeah, it's an RCT, perfect. We still got to look at it. Most of the studies were conducted in North America and Europe with the median population around 38,000 participants. The The risk of bias was low to moderate for those domains of observational studies. 78% adjusted for all important confounders like age, fat content, and reproductive factors. Sorry, they call it adiposity, but I call it fat content. In 47%, reliability and validity of the measure of key confounders could not be evaluated or was low. So that resulted in an overall moderate to serious risk of bias from those confounders. So they considered overall for the 84 publications that the overall risk of bias was moderate. So what does that mean? What is risk of bias and how is it categorized? So if there's a low risk of bias, that means there was minimal or no bias in the reports. If it's a moderate risk of bias, then it has some bias, but it may not invalidate the results. And if there's a serious risk of bias, then the study has significant biases that may affect the validity of the results. There are different types of bias, right? You have selection, performance, detection, attrition, reporting. Going into depth on those different types of terms won't add to the results of this article, so I'm not going to go into it. So let's move on to some of the charts that were provided in the article. This first chart is a summary of components of dietary and lifestyle patterns. It is important to understand what the colors mean. Personally, I believe they were used to mislead people because you could use any colors of the rainbow and they chose green, which typically means good, and red, which typically means bad. So what does it mean in this chart? So the dark red indicates that there's a low overall intake of the food group in most of the patterns, whereas the dark green indicates a higher intake of the food group in the pattern. So looking at this chart, right, fruits and veggies show green in all parts of the chart except for the bottom. Likewise, the red processed meats shows red. What this tells me is, again, it does not include people on an animal-based, ketogenic, or carnivore diet, and that is important. If we zoom into the dietary and lifestyle patterns in this chart, you can see that what they call the prudent vegetarian Mediterranean dieters consume mostly fruits, vegetables, legumes, fish, and seafood, which is totally logical, while the standard American dieters consume mostly veggies, grains, and cereals, red and processed meat, eggs, snacks, sweets, ultra-processed foods. So one last chart before we move on. This chart breaks down the information based on culturally defined dietary habits. Again, looking at the chart, remember the colors are based on the amount of consumption, not whether they are good or bad for you like the colors suggest, at least not here in America where red equals bad. I also believe that semantics are being played. For example, they call it a pro-vegetarian plant-based diet. Why not just call it a vegetarian plant-based diet? I did appreciate that while I totally disagree that anyone should be plant-based, at least they did separate out healthful and unhealthful plant-based because chips and ding-dongs are vegetarian. The article listed out associations between priority patterns, which are based on existing knowledge about the relationship between food, nutrients, and disease, and breast cancer, and they were examined in 26 observational studies. So of those studies, right, 22 were prospective cohorts, meaning they just followed a group of people over a period of time. 3 were pooled analysis cohorts, meaning that they actually had access to and were able to analyze the original level data from each of the participating studies, which is pretty cool. 1 was a case cohort study, meaning cohort members, a group, were assessed for risk factors at any time prior to the identification of cases. And then there were 3 randomized controlled trials that were also analyzed. All these patterns include a combination of high consumption of fruits, veggies, nuts, seeds, legumes, whole grains and cereals, olive and veggie oils, or high unsaturated, low unsaturated fatty acid ratio. There was also low consumption of red and processed meat, sugar sweetened beverages, and sodium, which I can't believe we're still on the sodium thing, but the predominant outcome was instances of breast cancer. So let's break down the different dietary patterns in this article, starting with the Mediterranean diet, which most people have heard of. So 16 publications, 15 observational, and one randomized control trial were identified. So obviously the Mediterranean diet consists of veggies, legumes, fruits and nuts, cereals, fish and seafood, unsaturated fats, and a moderate intake of alcohol, and it discourages dairy, meat, and meat products. Overall, the article identified a tendency toward an inverse association. So the higher the adherence to the Mediterranean diet, the lower the risk of breast cancer. Remember, this is a correlation, not a causation. So it hasn't proven that the Mediterranean diet can help you avoid breast cancer. So next, let's look at the pro-vegetarian plant-based diet. Again, semantic games being played here. Why call it pro-vegetarian? Just call it vegetarian. Anyways, so as we know, vegetarians, they eat veggies, legumes, fruits, cereals, potatoes, nuts, veggie oils, while avoiding animal products. In some cases, both the healthful and the unhealthful versions were able to be assessed. So according to this article, in all females, the estimates for higher compared to lower levels of the plant-based score and breast cancer range from 0.86 to 1.3, right? So 1 means that there's no difference. Give you kind of perspective there. So when they compared, so you have a healthful dietary pattern, it was associated with a lower risk of breast cancer, right? So the risk ratio was 0.83 to 0.89. Whereas if you were on an unhealthful plant-based pattern, it was a higher associated risk where the relative risk was 1.04 to 1.31. So it turns out that you can't eat plant-based crap products and have a reduced risk ratio. Then the article goes into looking at the posteriori diet pattern included, and that means that they represent actual dietary behavior in a population at a certain time point. So that's what that means. So 21 publications were from observational studies, 20 prospective cohorts, 2 case cohorts, 1 nested case control, and 1 pooled analysis. They identified 66 different patterns conducted in 27 study populations. Most studies used factor analysis, it's a statistical method, to derive a posteriori dietary pattern, except one study in which they used a cluster analysis. The S.A.D dieters, as we know, consume red and processed meats, snacks, sweets, ultra-processed foods, potatoes, eggs, refined grains and cereals, right? Some of them also include sugar-sweetened beverages, alcohol, dairy, poultry, and animal products, or animal fats, sorry. This is hardly a ketogenic diet, which they called it a Western meat alcohol. It's a standard American diet, so that's what I'm going to call it. So it was weird because they said that those results were inconsistent, but somehow they noted a tendency for an association between the S.A.D diet and breast cancer. The article also did note that the S.A.D diet that included high consumption of alcohol or studies with less risk of bias due to confounding things that they can't account for and missing data, which is it just wasn't included in the study, were slightly more consistently associated with increased breast cancer in all females than studies that the alcohol consumption was lower, or the ones with more risk of bias. So again, this is correlation. It does not show causation. So one of the things that they did, I think, falsely state, healthy diet, is a higher intake of fruits and veggies, nuts and seeds, legumes, whole grains and cereals, oil, veggie oil, and a lower intake of red processed meats, sugar-sweetened beverages, and sodium. Again, an animal-based ketogenic diet was not in this article. So they did state in their conclusion there was a strong probable evidence that a higher adherence to the WCRF, AICR, and ACS dietary lifetime scores decreases the risk of cancer in all females. the associations with the remaining dietary patterns was less conclusive. So again, this is correlation, not causation. It was not proven that a plant-based way of eating will reduce your risk of getting breast cancer. So I find this interesting because if you look at the consumption of beef over the last 30 years, it is quite a bit lower. Yet we still have how many women getting breast cancer? What do the alphabet people tell you to eat? And no, I'm not talking about the LGBTQ alphabet people, right? I'm talking about the American Cancer Society, the World Cancer Research Fund, right? Right, those ones. Those are the ones I'm asking about. So the American Cancer Society, of course, recommends more of a plant-based, right? Fruits, veggies, whole grains, limiting or avoiding red processed meats. I don't agree. Sugary crap, totally agree. High processed crap, totally agree. No, they didn't call it crap. That's just my interpretation. So the World Cancer Research Fund emphasizes obviously a plant-based diet, and then the American Institute for Cancer Research follow a new 2/3, 1/3 model. Didn't hear that before, where 2/3 plant-based and 1/3 animal products. So overall, what this tells me is they still can't stop cancer because they haven't looked at the right diet. And personally, I believe that is an animal-based ketogenic diet. So as I said in the intro, 4 years ago, I was identified as having a spot on my left breast. It wasn't massive, so the plan was just to monitor. So every 6 months, I travel and I go and get an ultrasound and mammogram. And 6 months ago, I was told, or it wasn't reported, that the spot was still there. So does that mean I'll never get cancer? No, that's delusional thinking. But I believe I am keeping it at bay because one of the side effects of cancer is more cancer. So, also, I'm sure someone will read the abstract of this article and be like, see, I told you red meat was bad for you. You need to be on a plant-based diet. Why this article did not prove that plant-based reduces cancer risk. It didn't prove that. So, I digress. So I credit my way of eating with healing me. So it is twofold. The first one, I do cyclic fasting, right? So this is where I fast between 15 and 30 hours. It all depends on how I'm feeling. If you're eating constantly, your body doesn't have time to clean up, right? Because that's what it does when we're sleeping, when we're not eating. If you go autophagy, they believe it's between 15 and 17 hours that autophagy starts. That's just the cleaning up of the cells, right? And if you're always eating, you can't clean house. So then that breeds opportunity for cancer cells. So that's the first thing that I do. The second thing is that I am on an animal-based ketogenic way of eating. So what is that? And why do I call it an animal-based ketogenic diet? Because it's been just spun up ridiculously, right? You have all these keto products in the store. Everything's labeled keto. No, I just eat cow. I eat chicken. Right? I eat pig. Well, only pig I eat is bacon, right? I eat fish, salmon, right? I don't buy keto breads and keto cookies and keto crap. I just eat the animal. So, right, you eat the animal. It's either the muscle or the organ of the animal or something that comes from an animal, right? So you have eggs, milk, dairy, cheese. That's what I eat, right? I only consume romaine lettuce because I don't have a gallbladder and I can't seem to figure out my protein fat ratios to make it where I don't need that either. So something I have been experimenting with because I'm not of the camp that I can never have carbohydrates, I can never have anything, I can never try anything. I have been experimenting with kamut flour and sourdough. So this has only been for 2 months, so I can't say it's been yay or no. I look at how it affects my intestines, right? Am I running to the bathroom? Am I having issues with going to the bathroom? And that's what I gauge it with. And so far, I can have a small amount of kamut flour or sourdough. So we'll see how that goes. But I don't consume fruit. I don't consume oatmeal, bread, pasta, any of the carbohydrates or alcohol, and I don't smoke. So those are all things that I have in my favor. So I would encourage people that are in the research world to do more studies or new studies, right? Looking at females on an animal-based ketogenic diet, right? One of the great lies that we've been told is that red meat causes cancer, even though there's no causative link, right? And just because you keep repeating something doesn't make it true, and that is totally this case where there is no causation link between red meat and cancer. They just made a bunch of correlations that really they can't take the confounders out of people that are smoke or drink, right? Because typically you look at your average American, right? If they're eating red meat, they're more apt to do other things that aren't healthy for them. So don't blame the red meat for what the other shit did. Also, I encourage my fellow laymen, because I am a layman, right? I don't have MD behind my name. I ain't got PhD piece of paper. Do your research and make informed decisions, right? That's what I did. I spent like 8 hours reading the entire article, looking up something that I didn't know, and I've decided that they really didn't cover my way of eating and my risk of breast cancer. So if you enjoyed the breakdown of this article, let me know what other articles you'd like me to break down in layman's terms. Consider subscribing to my channel as I continue to spread the word on proper nutrition that honestly I believe has been purposefully hidden from us for generations. Because if you're just sick enough that you need medication, but not so sick you die, Big Pharma can make quite a bit of money off you in your lifetime. So with that, I appreciate you watching and have a blessed day.